Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing and the things that piss us off in fly fishing. I hope everybody had a good New Year. This will be going up on January 2nd. Sorry we didn't do a New Year's episode this year, but hey, we did one last year. We did a Thanksgiving episode this year. I didn't do a Christmas episode this year because it was Christmas, and as much as I love you guys, I just wanted to spend Christmas doing some other stuff. So no episode on the day after Christmas. Apologize, but I hope that all your presents and some turkey and maybe a little bit of bonus fishing time were enough to tide you over. We're back now, and number one, I hope 2026 is off to a great start. But number two, we get to begin 2026 here on the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast with yet another edition of Complaint Corner. Now, for those of you who have not experienced Complaint Corner before, whether you're new to the podcast and just started this season or you skipped those or whatever, this is the episode that I find to be one of the most fun to record because, let's be real, bitching about stuff is fun. It's also the one that gets me the most hate mail because people sometimes are offended by what I have to say. It turns out that fly fishers in general are a pretty sensitive bunch, and if you ever poke their sensitive spots, and tell them something that they don't want to hear about the sport or how they engage with the sport or any of that stuff, it can make them kind of mad. And so usually what happens is I get a flood of supportive emails from folks who agree. I get a fair number of emails from folks who don't agree, and that's okay. We don't always have to agree on everything. But I do think that if we want fly fishing in general and backcountry fly fishing specifically to be better and to get better, then we shouldn't be hiding from the contentious stuff. We should be talking about it because this is how we start to address some of the things that drive us nuts and make us raise an eyebrow in the industry, in the sport, with natural places, and everything else that goes into it. So you can like it, you can not like it, but I like it, and so we're going to talk about it. And this season's episode of Complaint Corner is about something very specific, and it's about the concept of guide, not God. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before, but it is basically a phrase that is used to remind folks that just because somebody is a fly fishing guide doesn't mean that they know everything about fly fishing. And in a lot of cases, and I hate to say this, they might not even really be very good at fly fishing, at least not in the ways that matter. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this from sort of two angles. The first one being the general public perception of fly fishing guides as being mandatory, something that you just can't do without. The only way to learn how to fish, the only way to know how to fish, the only way to access places to fish. But then also from the guide perspective of believing that you are the only one, the keeper of the secrets, the one who knows when others don't know. And they're both symptoms of the same problem, but they are both problematic. And so we're going to talk about those a little bit from both perspectives. Now, I'm going to start this by saying I do not generally have a problem with fly fishing guides. I've been out with a lot of guides. Some of them are really good. I would say a majority of them are not, if I'm being brutally honest about it. But I have had some really great guides. I have been to certain places. Mongolia is one of them, where guides are mandatory. Because number one, they have to be with you for you to even access the river. But number two, you're talking about a different place on the other side of the planet with fish you've never dealt with before and conditions you haven't necessarily seen before. And in that case, it does make sense to have guides. So I'm not necessarily talking about that. If you're going to go fly fish in Africa, yeah, you're probably going to need a guide. If you're going to go saltwater fly fish for tarpon or bonefish or permit and you're a freshwater guy, yeah, you're probably going to need a guide. And ditto if you're a saltwater guy who wants to come try trout. I'm not saying that this is a universal thing, but I will say this. Of all the guided experiences that I have had for trout in the United States, or I should say in North America, not just the United States, I have noticed some pretty disturbing patterns with regard to guides and how they approach fly fishing. And we're going to talk about those patterns, but before we do that, I think it's helpful to just sort of lay the groundwork and say that the patterns are not necessarily the fault of the guides. The patterns are the fault of the fly fishing industry in general. And that creates a tough situation because if you are a guide in the industry, or if you're just a person in the industry, then you are by definition exposed to pressure from the industry and from the market that the industry occupies, right? Because at the end of the day, not everybody is a geek like I am, who's willing to sit here and do this basically for free, most people are trying to make a living and get paid. And anytime you try to get paid, you got to deal with the market. And anytime you deal with the market, you've got to respond to market pressure. And in some cases, unfortunately, maybe in a lot of cases, those market pressures are pretty incompatible with fly fishing as I know and love it, and can lead to some really concerning behavior on the part of both the businesses and the guides who work with them. And I want to say this really clearly. It's not necessarily their fault, right? I mean, I understand why it happens. I understand where the pressure comes from. I understand why they respond to the pressure the way they do. So this is not necessarily an indictment of these people as individuals. They are existing in a system that doesn't allow them to necessarily connect with the sport exactly the way that I would hope that they would as stewards as well as guides. They could do it differently. Some of them do it differently. I do know some incredible guides out there who really come into it with a serious environment first, river first, respectful approach that is about understanding what we're doing and the places that we're doing it in, rather than just making a quick buck and getting some people on some fish. But they are the exception and not the rule. And I really do think that that's an issue, because it means that over time, those market forces and the industry itself begin to pollute authenticity in fly fishing. Okay, so you've heard me say many times before that fly fishing is not just about catching fish. And in fact, I would go one step further and say that it's not even primarily about catching fish. For us as backcountry fly anglers, it's about exploring new places. It's about pushing ourselves. It's about the challenge of reaching and engaging with and working in these sort of tough environments. Not because you can't catch those fish somewhere else. You can, right? You can go catch these fish in an easier place where you don't have to go more than 10 feet from your car. But it's about the growth and the challenge and the understanding, and yes, here comes the word that I've used so many times, the mastery of going out and doing it. And it's about the appreciation for the places, for the animals that we are hunting, the fish, and just generally about understanding and reveling in and being present with the beauty of nature and this incredible planet that we live on. Now, that's one way to experience fly fishing. That's how I experience fly fishing. I believe, based on the conversations I've had with so many of you, that that is how most of you experience fly fishing, and specifically backcountry fly fishing. But it is not the way that the general market relates to fly fishing. And by the general market, I mean the general public who are going to open their wallets and spend money on destination trips, guided trips, guides at their local rivers, whatever. And that's not necessarily their fault. I'm not throwing shade on the people who spend their money that way. You get to spend your money however you want. I'm a capitalist. You make your money. You get to use your money how you choose. But they are coming at it from a fundamentally different perspective. And I worry very often that what happens is that money, that sort of larger market segment, it is not made up of serious fly anglers. It's not made up of people who are into conservation. It's not made up of people who really have any understanding, or if we're being honest, truly, any serious, deep personal respect or appreciation for rivers or the places where they're doing this. It is made up primarily of people who are looking for entertainment. And entertainment is not the same thing as growth or respect. It is a totally different thing. And it leads to a fundamental problem that I have noticed on most of the guided trips that I've been on. And I don't really go on these domestically very often anymore for this exact reason. It's not the way I like to fish. And it just feels bad to me because it is anathema to my understanding of the sport and why I'm in the water. But it leads to a situation where fly fishing becomes sort of an amusement park, and the guides are the guys operating the ride, right? So if you've ever been to an amusement park and you're at a carnival, right? And there's a carny. I don't know if we're allowed to say carnies. That might be politically incorrect. So no offense to any of you who might live in that world. But he's operating like the dragon boat, or the roller coaster or those big hammer swing things that people sit on. And his job is simply to stand by a machine and push the same button the same way for the same amount of time every day so that people get to go and do this ride. And the people get to have a fun experience. They get to take pictures. They get to laugh and scream and do those things. And then they get to go home. And it's transactional, right? So they show up, they pay money, they get the experience that they paid money for, and then they leave. And there's really no learning that comes from that. And there's really no engagement from the person running the ride, right? He doesn't understand how the ride works. He doesn't understand the mechanics of it. He doesn't understand how it was put together. He doesn't understand why the time limit is this or that. His job is to run the ride as he's been instructed to do, because that's what the paying customers want. And that's what happens in fly fishing with so many of these guides. They will go out, and I'll give you just a quick example. And I'm going to be a little cautious with this. I'm not going to name names or companies, but I did a trip to the White River in Arkansas maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't mind naming it because everybody knows about the White River. But I was out there, and I was there because I wanted to catch big brown trout, right? And that's what the White River is known for, is monster brown trout. And I went out there, and it's a tailwater. So for those of you who don't know, this is a massive tailwater at the bottom of a huge dam. And the way that people fish it with guides, really, and part of the reason that I had a guide, is that they use jet boats. Okay, so they'll like jet you up. They put in right below the dam. They jet you up almost to the dam, and then you float down the river. And while you're doing that, at least in my case, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, there are probably different times a year where this goes differently, but most of those fish, the big ones, are sitting down on the very bottom of this river. And so what happens is you get in the boat, they jet you up to the dam, and then you do what I consider like chuck and duck. I mean, you're throwing a very heavily weighted, we had literally like triangle weights on our leaders when we were doing this. It was like throwing a deep sea rig, and you're throwing it out there with an indicator, and then they are matching the speed of the current so that you are just drifting this big heavy rig at the very bottom and hoping a fish will eat it. And it is an interesting thing to do because it's really not fly fishing in any meaningful sense. Yes, you're holding a fly rod. Yes, there are flies at the end of your line. But in practice, it does not feel like fly fishing. It feels like, trolling or anything that, something other than fly fishing. And it felt bad to me. And like, we are catching fish, I mean, I caught some decent fish and they were pretty, and it's fine. Like, there were fish caught. But as we're going up and down, you'll float down the river for a while. And then when you get to a certain point, you pass the good spot. And then the guide will turn the jet boat around and jet you back up the river. And then you come back down, and then they jet you back up, and it's like a water slide, right? You climb back up, you come down. You climb back up, you come down. And you do that all day. And we're like, I want to throw my own flies. At some point I get sick of this exercise, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put on these flies. And the guide says, no, we're not going to put those flies on. We're going to use the same flies we've been using. And I said, okay, but like, I've already caught some fish on these flies. And now I think based on what I see with insect activity and everything else, I'd like to try these flies. And, the guide said, no, we're just going to leave these flies on. And I said, okay, but why? Right? Like, here I am as a nerdy fly fisher guy who reads about bugs and reads whole books about bugs. And I'm like, okay, but like, why would I not do that? Like, why are these flies that you've tied on the ones that work ecologically? I understand the fish eat them, and that's fine, but I would like to understand why. And the guide was completely unable to provide an answer to that. The answer was basically, I don't know. They just work at this time of year. We put these flies on your line, you throw it into the water this way, you fish at this depth in this spot, and then you catch this fish, which probably they have caught before because they know those fish are there. And and that was as far as the conversation went. I tried to engage more. I tried to ask questions. I'm like, well, yeah, but why would we here? And why this spot instead of that spot? And help me understand the river. And I was met really with just a shoulder shrug and sort of this look of like, dude, who cares? You're catching fish. Shut up and take your pictures. And that really kind of ruined the experience for me, if I'm being honest. Yes, I caught some fish. Yes, I took my pictures. But I don't have fond memories of that trip. And I think the reason that I don't have fond memories of that trip is that it just didn't feel to me like fly fishing in any meaningful sense, right? I mean, I might as well have not been doing anything. I mean, everything was decided for me. I had no control over the experience, and it was just to get a fish in the net and take a picture. And I had a really bad reaction to that. And I've had similar experiences elsewhere. That's not the first time that I've experienced it. It was unfortunately not a one-off incident or an isolated incident. I have had that same experience before in other places. And it just sort of made me feel gross, right? Because like I'm out here to really, the appeal of fly fishing to me is figuring it out and understanding the place where I am and understanding why that fly works this time of year and why the fish are there and what this looks like and how is it affected by weather and pressure swings and flow changes and all the other things that go into it. And I don't get that on some of these guided amusement park trips. I've been on similar trips in Jackson Hole, floating on the Snake River. I've been on similar trips in Montana. I've been on similar trips here in Colorado. And, especially early on in my career, I would go on those trips here. I'd pay a guide. I really only did this like twice. And I was like, just help me figure out how to do this fly fishing thing, right? Because I wanted to figure it out. I didn't know where to start. And I thought a guide was the answer. And I went out with them, and it became apparent that these guys, at least the ones that I had, a lot of them don't actually have any real conceptual understanding of fly fishing as an art or as a practice or as a sport. And they don't really have any real conceptual understanding or even, to be honest, an interest in understanding the nuances of what we're doing and the environment that we're doing it in. And as a result, they can provide you with practical information, like, an instruction manual. Okay, you're going to tie this knot, and then you're going to tie on this fly, and it's going to be this far from that thing, and then we're going to throw it over there. And that's fine, right? The what and the how are legitimate questions in fly fishing that we all have to answer every time we go out. But the why is the big question, right? We said before, why is the most existentially important question that a human being can ask about anything? Whether it's about how you use your time or your relationships or why you are the way you are or why something works in fly fishing, why is what keeps our brains going. It's the cognitive hook. It's the thing that we're really interested in. And when you remove the why, you cheapen the experience. And my fundamental issue with so many guiding services and so many guides is that because they are in it to make money, and because the primary way to make money is to attract the mass market, and because the mass market really does not have any particular interest in going deep into this stuff. They just want to get their grip and grin from their 2 fishing trips a year so they can show it to their friend and say, check out this rad fish I caught. It leads to this sort of gross reinforcement loop where the market doesn't really care. And then rather than educating the market or insisting that there be some level of giving a shit to go out and fish in these places, the industry responds to it by dumbing itself down. And then you wind up hiring people not because they're really excellent outdoorsmen or fishermen or anything else, but just because they know that there's a fish behind that rock in March, and if you throw this thing, you'll catch them. And if you go down here to this pool, there are fish there, and you throw this thing, and they'll catch them. And if that doesn't work, then you go around the bend to the next glide or the next tail out, and you can throw this, and then you'll catch this fish that they've caught a million times before. And I think that sucks. In part because the people who are engaging in that are not getting any better at it. In part because it's a missed opportunity to really educate and help people appreciate fly fishing as something more than just a roller coaster or an amusement park ride. And also because I think it's kind of disrespectful to the places. And you can call me a hippie for that. That's fine. I run around in burlap and Birkenstocks, so you can think whatever you like of me. But it feels somewhat disrespectful to me to take a place with that kind of natural majesty and this kind of incredibly intricate, perfectly balanced, just delicate, dynamic system and reduce something that beautiful and that detailed to entertainment only. It's like a version of paving paradise to me. And I don't know if I can fully articulate exactly why I feel that way. Maybe at some point I'll sit down and actually try to write it down. But it feels like an affront to the place. You have this wild, incredible, beautiful place that's operating without us and has been operating without us for so long. And then you put 80 drift boats down it, and there's absolutely no giving a shit about the fish or the river or the water or the conditions or anything else. It's just about whether or not you can get those people in a boat, get their money, and land yourself a big tip by putting them on fish. And that sucks. And to be honest with you, that is not the way that I think guiding should work. But it is the way that I would say if I'm being honest, and I don't know if I can quantify this exactly, but I think probably 80% of the guides out there fall into that bucket. And it is an interesting thing because, I try not to do that. Now, I'm not a professional guide. Thank God. I have no desire to be one. But I do take people out fly fishing all the time, sometimes on a volunteer basis with groups, sometimes kids, sometimes friends, sometimes coworkers, sometimes business associates. I take people out fishing as a quote guide all the time. Now, I don't get paid for it because I don't need to get paid for it, and I'm not allowed to without an outfitter's license, which I don't want to deal with. But it's kind of the same experience, except that I really take the time to go out and try to talk to them about why we're doing something. Like if we're going to put these 2 flies on the rig, I'm going to tell you why we're going to put those 2 flies on the rig. If we're going to fish a dry dropper, I'm going to explain why we're going to fish the dry dropper, right? They're in the mid column. They're looking up. You have this hatch going on. If we're going to nymph, I'll explain why we're going to nymph. If we're throwing streamers, I'm going to tell them why we're throwing streamers and what kind of animal that imitates and everything else. If we're going to throw it behind that log, I'm going to tell them why the fish is behind that log, or why they sit in pocket water, or why they sit in riffles. I'm going to explain to them the why of what we're doing. And you know what? Yes, that does take time. It means that you spend a little bit less time just throwing shit where you're told to throw it and setting when you're told to set. But the result is that I would say this is pretty much 100%. Every single person who's come back from fishing with me is like, man, I had no idea how much there was to learn. And it was really cool to talk about that stuff. Yes, they're excited about the fish. Yes, they caught fish. I always want them to catch fish because success matters in fly fishing, of course. But usually it's not like man, I can't believe that was an amazing rainbow and I can't wait to send that picture to Uncle Jim. I mean, they probably do send the picture to Uncle Jim. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But their takeaway is different. It's more of man, what a cool place. What a cool environment. I had no idea all that stuff was going on, and now I am interested and I'm curious about it. And the interest and the curiosity are really the big things, right? If you can spark interest and spark curiosity, then you will drive better behavior. You'll drive learning, you'll drive conservation, you'll drive respect, you'll drive cooperation around these places. But if you just deal with it as entertainment, and you're just out there for a picture, or you're just out there to get people a picture so you can get paid, you don't drive anything except a perpetuation of that entertainment cycle. And that, I believe, sucks and might be one of the greatest threats to fly fishing in general. Being able to go out and tell people exactly what to do to catch a fish in exactly the same place you fished 1,000 times before does make you a guide. And it probably makes you a fairly effective guide if you're willing to use the sole metric that your clients caught fish. But it doesn't make you a fly fisherman, and it doesn't make you an angler. If you really want to get there, you have got to understand and be curious about what we're doing. And if you're not feeling that way as a guide or as an industry person of any kind, then, man, I got to tell you, I don't like it. There's my complaint for Complaint Corner. It's not good, and it's something that I think needs to be dealt with and addressed at some point going forward. I don't know exactly how to do that, but I do know it's something that we ought to talk about, because otherwise we run the risk of basically blowing up these places with a bunch of people who give zero shits about them and are using them to turn a profit rather than using them as a place of solace or refuge or peace or anything else. And I don't think that's great. So that's my big issue with guides, and we could talk about some other stuff too. I mean, some of the guides are assholes, right? They yell at you. They're not nice to their clients. Their boat's not clean. They're not organized. I mean, there are a bunch of things that we can throw out there, but those are really like people level issues, right? Some people are more organized than others. Some people are more personable than others. Some people are nicer and more patient than others. And so I don't really want to get into that as a thing that we need to talk about. It's really more about the systemic level stuff. And, in addition to the systems level piece of not really knowing what the hell you're doing out there beyond just being in this sort of memorization role of knowing where the fish are and what you need to throw at them in a certain specific place, there's also this sort of general lack of outdoor skills, right? And sort of both fishing and non-fishing related on the skills side. So, for instance, most guides only guide like a handful of rivers. Some only guide one river, and that's all they do. And they know that river like the back of their hand. They know every spot. They know every nook. They know every cranny. They know every eddy. They know all the stuff. They may not be able to explain a lot of it, at least from a why perspective, but they know all the stuff. If you take that same guy and drop him on a different river, even fishing for the same species, he might have some trouble. And I cannot tell you how many times I have gone out fishing with a friend of mine who happens to be a guide, and I will take him or her to a new stream somewhere way off, right? This is not like a typical guided stream, and most guided streams, let's be real, are not serious backcountry, right? Because again, people don't want to hike. They don't want to put effort into getting these places. They want to show up. They want it to be easy. They want to catch their fish. So you take these people off of these primarily touristy places, and then you bring them into a real backcountry environment. Maybe it's a high alpine lake. Maybe it's a very small stream at 10,000 feet. Maybe you're fishing for native cutthroat in a river that nobody's ever heard of, or a tributary system that very few people have ever been to. And they're suddenly kind of lost, right? Not because it's hard or because it's super complicated, but because their brains, they've dug these grooves into their brains that they keep following. And it's an interesting thing to watch for somebody who, is incredibly competent in one environment. But once you remove them from that environment and put them somewhere else, they are no longer competent. And that is interesting from a fishing perspective, but it's also interesting from a general outdoor perspective, right? So like, in addition to the fishing things, we're like, well, I don't really know how to fish this small stream, and I never throw a double dry rig, and I don't really know what to do with high alpine lakes, and what's a cutthroat. That happens all the time. But then also, I have noticed so many times that these guys will show up and they don't have the right gear, right? Or they're not prepared to hike, or they're not properly set up for weather or rain or really cold water or various other conditions that can change really quickly out there, as opposed to the relatively stable, predictable conditions and water that they're finding on their home streams where they guide. And that's interesting to me too, right? Because if you have a Venn diagram here between like the outdoors in general and the people who love the outdoors and industry, there should be some overlap in that Venn diagram, right? You would expect that many of the guides would also be fairly serious outdoor people because they spend so much time outside, but they're not. And I think part of the reason for that is, for them, it's just a job, right? They don't spend a lot of their free time out there fishing on their own. Now, some do. I'm not saying that's a universal statement. Some do. But many of them don't. A lot of them are not spending time hiking into places. They are not spending time backpacking into places. They are not spending time doing anything that looks like serious outdoor activity. Yeah, you can drive down to the local river. Maybe you walk a quarter mile to get there and you catch a couple fish. That's fine. And I'm not bagging on you. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But I think if your living is going to be made in an industry that is about the outdoors, and really, at least at its core and at its heart, is about appreciation for wild places and the fish that live in them. And let's be honest, if you are going to walk around with this swagger as a guide that says, I'm a fly fishing guide and so I know everything, you sort of have this, it's usually this kind of macho, outdoorsy, I'm a rugged dude vibe from those guys. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, as long as you can actually back it up with actually being an outdoorsman. And so many of them cannot. I'll go out with guys and it's like they don't bring water filters because they've never thought about that before. They don't have a first aid kit, even if they're out there with clients 5 miles somewhere off in the middle of nowhere. They've never really thought about it. They don't know how to pitch a tent. They don't know how to deal with cold water. They don't know how to deal with cold weather. They don't have a rain jacket. They're not carrying any food or enough food. It's like they haven't really ever done anything with the outdoor. They've never engaged with the outdoors in a way more meaningful than, what is the minimum that I can do in the easiest possible way to make a buck? And that does not make you an outdoorsman. And if you are that kind of person and you are running around with your swagger and your beard and acting as if you were a big rugged woodsman because you are a fly fishing guide and you don't have those skills or that experience, then you should stop. There is nothing that drives me more crazy than somebody who positions themselves not just personally but professionally in a way designed to get money from other people as a serious outdoorsman or a serious outdoors person who is not a serious outdoors person, because you are now misrepresenting yourself to those people. You're taking money from them based on that misrepresentation. You're potentially putting them into dangerous situations and yourself into dangerous situations because those people are trusting you to know what you're supposed to know, to have what you're supposed to have, and to be able to navigate those situations. And on top of all that, you are disrespecting the people who have put in the work to go out and figure out how to do this stuff and be actual outdoor people, outdoorsmen and outdoorswomen. And I just think that sucks. That is a super cheapening of the experience. It is a sort of false marketing, to be honest with you, from some of these guys. And I think that it should stop. If you want to frame yourself as I can take you to this river and teach you how to catch these fish, but that's all I do, then just do that. But don't hold yourself out there. And I've seen so many of these in Colorado saying, we'll take you on a backcountry experience. We're going to hike you up to this lake. We're going to take you out to here. We're going to show you the backcountry. And those guys don't know how to be in the backcountry. First of all, a lot of what they call the backcountry really isn't backcountry. But setting that aside, so many of those guys don't know how to do that. And they certainly don't know how to do it safely. And now they're starting to monetize something that carries real risk and also is really special to a lot of us, right? Like, these wild places deserve to be occupied and visited by people who understand that they deserve respect and care and stewardship as wild places. And if you are not really coming into that as somebody who is serious about being outside, if your day job is just fly fishing one river or a couple places and then you just don't go outside of that, well, then you probably are not going to walk into that with the same mindset. This is the same thing we talked about in the spot burning episode. People bring their mindsets into these places, and then their mindsets determine how they interact with the places. And if your mindset is not about understanding, respect, and mastery, which really is the cornerstone of understanding and respect, then the likelihood is that you're not going to respect these places. And we're going to start seeing trash come up. You're going to mistreat the fish. You're going to mishandle the fish. You might go stomping through something you shouldn't go stomping through. You could put somebody in danger and need help. There's a lot of stuff that could go wrong with that. And I just find myself flabbergasted by how many folks do it anyway. And if I could pick one single thing that drives me the craziest, it is this sort of imposter guide thing, where they're really not great fly anglers. They're definitely not great outdoors people, but they're going to make you think that they are because, damn it, that's how they make their money. That sucks. And if you're that guy or if you're that outfit, you should stop and reevaluate it. Come up with a way to educate your customers. Come up with a way to engage meaningfully with the environment. Come up with a way to make it about understanding and conservation and appreciation and respect, rather than about making a quick buck and making yourself look like you've got a whole bunch of chest hair because you are a fly fishing guide. Stop doing that. It makes you an asshole. It's bad for the industry. It's bad for the environment. And it's bad for all of us as fly anglers. So stop it. And now listen, I'm going to shut up here in a second. If you are a good guide and you're not this way, and there are plenty of you out there, I know that. So again, this is not a universal thing. Thank you for doing that, because you are really the stewards of fly fishing to the masses, right? I don't have a lot of contact with the great unwashed masses of people who might fly fish but usually don't. You do, and that puts you in a unique position of responsibility where you really can carry this message of understanding and respect out to people who need to hear it and who might internalize it and learn from it. So if you're already doing this, then dude, you're doing it right. And number one, thank you. Number two, I hope you're making a bunch of money doing it. And number three, I hope to see you out there one of these days. But if you're someone else and you're just kind of cynically sending people down the old water slide to make some money, I'm not going to tell you can't do it. You're allowed to do what you want to do. But I think you should do better. There, I said it. Don't be sorry. Be better. All right. And with that, I'm going to shut up. There's probably a lot more to say on this subject. We will come back to it at some point. But the next time you go out to think about booking a guided trip, remember that you don't necessarily need a guide. You can probably teach yourself a lot of it. In fact, in a lot of cases, you might know more than that guide, even if they try to market something to you that says otherwise. And to be perfectly honest with you, whoever you get really might not be all that good. So if you want to do it, go do it, but be judicious about it. If you are a guide, make sure that you've earned that mantle and that you are being conscientious while you are out there with your clients. And for everybody involved in the industry, for the love of all that's holy, let's find a way in 2026 to come together around protecting these places, respecting the fish that we're chasing, and bringing the right kind of mindset into the wild places that we love so much. Happy New Year, guys. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Hope you're out there fishing, and I will see you back here real soon. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. But I hope that you know why you're doing what you're doing.